Even when my own daughter refused to join us in our kingdom, I killed her and we all ate her," the grandmother said, laughing so hard. "And I spoke to my daughter-in-law gently to come be a part of us so that she will replace me when I'm no more. But she was adamant, and I apologized to her, and then asked her never to tell anyone what I had discussed with her. If she had joined, the people in our kingdom wouldn't have asked me to sacrifice my son. So when she refused, we decided to deal with her by eating all their flesh." They continued staring at each other until she entered Mitchell's room. Nelson didn't utter a word to her. "Nelson, Nelson, where have you been?" Mom's voice echoed in his head as he stood there contemplating whether to go after the doll girl or not. He didn't understand what the native doctor had done exactly, whether the incisions on his body were meant to make the doll girl disappear from their home after setting eyes on him, or if they were to harden his heart against the things that used to freak him out. "Nelson," Mom screamed suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Are you okay?" she asked as soon as he looked at her. She stood before him with a hand rubbing his face, and he nodded. "Wait, excuse me," he said, removing her hand before going after the doll girl into Mitchell's room. "Where are you going?" Mom called after him, but he ignored her as he entered the room. He opened Mitchell's door slowly and stepped in. The doll girl was standing right there in the center of the room, panting heavily and staring at him. He thought of leaving her there and returning to wherever he came from, as it seemed whatever the native doctor did wasn't working, but on second thought, he decided to challenge her. "Who are you?" he summoned the courage to ask. "How dare you?" she queried in a deep baritone, just like the voice of an able-bodied man. "What exactly is your mission here?" Nelson pressed. "You want to know?" she questioned. "Yes, I want to know." "My mission here is to wipe out this entire family, and I won't stop until I achieve that aim." "But why?" he asked. "Your mother once dared us. She refused to heed our call. Therefore you all must suffer for it," she roared. "I don't understand. Can you shed more light on all you just said, please?" Nelson said, "If you want to know more, your grandmother is the best person to ask. She's the only one in the right position to tell you everything," she said, turning her head from side to side as she spoke. "So, how do we make you leave here?" he asked. "Not until I achieve my aim. I was sent here to wipe out the entire family, and my next victim is your sister Mitchell." "What?" Nelson exclaimed. Please, tell me exactly what we need to do." "To me, nothing. I'm only speaking with you because of what you have on your body. But as for leaving here, no way. Not until my mission here is complete. Please, I beg you, spare us," he begged on his knees. "I can't," she said, and then transformed back into the doll. As soon as she transformed, Mitchell opened the door. "What are you doing here in my room?" Mitchell questioned, hurrying to her doll and picking it up, holding it close to her chest. "No, Mitchell, please drop the doll," Nelson pleaded, still on his knees, but she ignored him and left the room instead. He remained on his knees and started to weep. He wished that one of them would just listen to him so they could find a solution to whatever was happening. But to them, he was beginning to lose his mind. Nelson stood up and went out of Mitchell's room into the living room. People around started to ask him where he had been. He went to his mother, who stood up from the couch as soon as she saw him, took her hand and asked her to follow him outside. There was something he needed to discuss with her. "Mom, do you have any idea of all that's going on in this family? What exactly is happening? Is there anything you're supposed to do and you're not doing? That's now affecting this family," he probed. "I don't understand. Why are you speaking like an old man? What exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, staring at him. "Mom, please ignore the way I talk and answer my questions," he said. "I have no idea what you're talking about. What exactly do you mean by that?" she questioned. Upon hearing that, Nelson let out a deep sigh and started to leave her presence. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To where I came from. I can't stay in this house with that doll." He looked back and said, "Ignore that doll, please. It's just a doll. Where exactly did you come from? At your age, you already have a choice on where to stay. What do you expect? I cannot stay in this house with you people. It's better one looks for a way to get rid of it before it catches its next prey." "What do you mean by that?" asked Mom. "You will soon understand since you don't believe me, but I pray it gets resolved before its next plan manifests. There's no way I'm going to allow you out of this house at just 10 years old when your father's burial is just next weekend. What exactly is your problem? Since you don't want to listen to me and you have chosen to live like a street kid, I will make sure I pay some army officers to arrest you and the person that's harboring you," she threatened. "You should be concerned about how to get rid of that evil doll instead. I'm out of here," he said, sprinting away. David, help!" she screamed at the top of her voice as she ran after him, but he ignored her and continued running until he got to his destination, his newfound home under the bridge. After he narrated everything to Marley, they decided to visit the native doctor, who then asked him to come back a few days before Dad's burial. After the visit to the native doctor, Marley and he returned to their home under the bridge. They had no rooms to sleep in, just an open space with mats on the ground when it was time to sleep. That same night, he couldn't even sleep a wink. He kept tossing and turning on the mat he laid on until he finally stood up and went to sit by a corner beside the bush. Cars continued passing on the bridge non-stop with their lights on, so the place he sat wasn't dark at all. "Bobo, how far?" he heard all of a sudden, and he jerked back to reality because a lot was going on in his head at just 10 years old that he couldn't even find answers to. It was the voice of one of the guys around, Mufu. Mufu and his friend Marley were perfect examples of the saying, cat and rat. They always had something to argue and quarrel about whenever they were together, so they hardly talked and were always avoiding each other. Mufu and Marley were of the same age range, so he always accorded Mufu with respect too. "Good evening," he greeted with a bowed head as soon as he heard Mufu's voice. "What's up?" "Are you okay?" Mufu asked, bringing out a wrap from his pocket. He let out a deep sigh and then looked at Mufu. "I am trying to be fine," he said. "What's up?" "Do you mind sharing?" Mufu asked, and immediately tears started to drip down Nelson's face. "Come on, little man, don't do this. Whatever it is, just share it with me. Who knows if I have the solution to it?" Mufu added, but Nelson continued crying, unable to utter a word. "Do you know how I got here?" Mufu queried, and Nelson shook his head. "I'll tell you," Mufu said, sitting beside him. "Okay, sir," Nelson managed to say, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "I started to live here some 8 years ago. I ran away from home because my father didn't like the kind of friends I was keeping. He would talk, nag, and even spank me, but I never listened to him. So one day, he found some substances in my bag and threatened to get me arrested, even started calling some officers in my presence. So in the process of escaping from the house, my mum was trying to stop me, but..." Mufu paused and started to cry. "Sorry, but..." Nelson asked. "I pushed her. It wasn't my intention though, I never meant for it to happen that way," Mufu said amidst tears. "So she fell?" Nelson asked with curiosity. "Yes, she fell, hitting the back of her head on the tiled floor. And that was the end of it all," Mufu said again in tears. "She died?" Nelson asked, staring at him in disbelief, expecting a confirmation to what he had just asked. But instead, Mufu brought out a lighter from his pocket, lit the wrap, and started to inhale the smoke, puffing it out suddenly as if his life depended on it without answering the question. But Nelson understood what that meant. "So what happened after that?" Nelson asked again. "I ran far away from home with an older friend who then brought me here," Mufu said in a deep baritone, puffing out another smoke. "So how did you find out that your mother died after you pushed her and ran away?" Nelson queried. As soon as he heard that, Nelson exhaled. "I saw it on Facebook. My big brother had posted it. But I pretended as though I didn't see the post. But deep down, that news was the saddest and most painful news I've ever seen in my entire life. I died 1,000,000 times as soon as I saw it," Mufu said, raising the polo shirt he was wearing and wiping his tears with it. "You know what Facebook is, right?" Mufu asked, feigning a smile. "Yes, it's on my parents' phone," Nelson said. "You're smart," Mufu said with another drag of the substance. "Let me shock you. Have you heard of the name Prophet Rufus Edie before?" Yes, Nelson replied with multiple nods. "My parents loved watching his program on TV," Nelson replied with a grin. "Unfortunately, he's the father of this bad boy," Mufu said, and Nelson's jaw dropped in awe. "For real? But there's this classmate of mine who bears Mufu too, and he's not a Christian, but a Muslim." "So I thought you were a Muslim too," Nelson said. "My real name is Bethel. Had to change my name when I got here, but not the Muslim Mufutau. I think that's the pronunciation. Just Mufu to disguise myself," Mufu said, smiling. "So the prophet is your real father?" Nelson queried, to be sure. And Mufu nodded with the substance in his mouth. "So tell me your story," Mufu said, and Nelson told him everything in tears. "Take, it will make you feel better," Mufu said, offering Nelson the substance. "No, I'm sorry I can't take it." "I'm fine," Nelson said, waving a hand. "Come on, take it," Mufu persisted, and Nelson looked at him eyeball to eyeball to be sure if he meant what he was saying, and Mufu confirmed with nods. Nelson took it, dragged it the first time, and he almost choked. He started coughing, almost throwing up, and Mufu started to pat his back. After Nelson was a bit calm, he dragged it the second and the third time, And that was it. He lost control over himself and could no longer remember what happened next. Nelson woke up later to see Marley seated beside him with bruises on his hands, while Mufu stood by a corner leaning on a tree with a bandaged head. He later learned that Marley had fought Mufu for giving him what he had given him at just 10 years old. A day before the burial, Marley and he went to see the native doctor, who gave him a live chicken to kill and then rubbed the blood on his body from head to toe on the day of the burial. After taking the chicken from the native doctor, Marley and he took the chicken under the bridge and had it tied to one of the trees around, as he had planned to return home the next day, as the burial was to take place 3 days after. The next morning after waking up, it was finally time for him to do the ritual with the blood of the chicken, but the chicken was nowhere to be found. Marley and he searched and searched, but couldn't find it, only to find some guys around gathered somewhere by the corner with plates of food, making merry, including Mufu. "Hold on," Marley said, hurrying to them. He didn't really hear what Marley was asking them, but suddenly he saw Marley snatching the plates they were holding from them and flinging them into the bush, one after the other. "Guy, what is it now? Are you crazy or something?" Mufu raged at the top of his voice at Marley in anger, while the other guys stood there staring at Marley with their mouths agape. "Are you guys normal at all? You saw a chicken being tied to a tree, and without fear, or asking around who or what brought the chicken there, you guys slaughtered it and made pepper soup with it. Do you guys think it's an ordinary chicken?" Marley fumed, and the rest of the guys stood there without a word, just staring at each other. Even Mufu, who had been ranting, suddenly kept quiet on hearing Marley's last line. "Jesus!" he exclaimed with both hands on his head on hearing all Marley said. "What do you mean by it's not an ordinary chicken?" one of the guys asked. "Please get out." "Just know that what you all gathered and ate will affect you." Marley fumed again. "Let's go," Marley said to him from afar, walking towards him aggressively, but he stood there with his attention on the other guys, wondering if all he heard was actually what was going on. Suddenly, Marley grabbed his hand and started dragging him with him. "What's going on?" "What about the chicken, and where are we going?" he probed. "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear what they said?" "They are there feasting on the chicken we are supposed to use for the ritual," Marley said, and he immediately withdrew his hand from Marley's, and then he paused. "So what's going to happen now?" he asked with a bowed head, feeling so bad and also very disappointed. "Let's return to the native doctor," said Marley, and he followed him slowly from behind until they reached the native doctor's house. "There's nothing I can do," said the native doctor, and they begged and begged. But he refused to do anything about it, and then they left. That day was one of the saddest days of his life, and that night he went to a corner of the bridge to sit, and he wept. A few hours later, he was still there when Mufu came to him again, smoking and puffing out the smoke into the air. "Bobo, how are you?" Mufu asked, but he only turned and looked at him, and then turned back. "Come on, talk to me. Aren't we friends anymore? Even Marley cannot come between us." "You know that, right?" Mufu queried with a grin. He sighed and then asked Mufu to sit. "That chicken that you guys ate was meant for ritual to liberate my family from what I had explained to you the other day," he said. "It's a lie. Who took you there?" "Marley, right?" Mufu asked with eyes glued to him. "It doesn't matter. I'll do anything to set my family free," he said. "But inasmuch as we all visit such places here to survive, I don't think it's the right place to be for you, considering your age," said Mufu. "So what do I do now?" he asked. Mufu sighed and then puffed out another smoke. "Will you like to follow me somewhere?" "Ah, to where?" "No, I can't," he said, folding his arms. "I was only trying to help," Mufu said, standing up to walk away. "Wait," he exclaimed, and Mufu paused. "But to where?" "Well, to my father. I think you should seek the face of Jesus instead. He will help you solve and deliver you from whatever your family is facing. If you don't mind, I can take you to my father so that he can pray for you and the rest of your family." "What? How do you intend to do that?" "I thought you left home some few years ago and have since not returned," he questioned. "I have no choice at this point. I'm getting tired of living this kind of life already. You know, old age is beginning to tell on me, and I don't intend to get married and start raising kids like this," Mufu said, pointing at himself. "Let's start with this," he said, throwing what he was smoking into the nearby bush. "You're serious," he said excitedly, and Mufu nodded. "When do we go?" "By weekend." "Weekend is my daddy's burial. Can't we go tomorrow?" "Today is Wednesday already, and I'm also worried about my sister. I don't even know if she's still alive." Mufu then sighed. "What will you tell Marley?" "And where will you tell him that you're going?" "And with who?" Mufu queried. "I'll just tell him all our plans," he said. "I'm here. I don't think you should go anywhere with him. I don't trust him." They heard all of a sudden from behind. It was Marley. "Well, I am not forcing him to go anywhere with me. I was only trying to help," said Mufu, walking out on both of them. "I have known Mufu for years now. There's nothing sincere about him. Stay away from Mufu. He's not the kind of person you think he is. I know he must have been trying to brainwash you so you can follow him to wherever he wants you to follow him to for the liberation of your family. But if you must listen to me, do not follow Mufu anywhere. See, Mufu will hit you so hard unexpectedly, leaving you so confused at the end of it all. I know you don't understand that statement yet, considering your age, but I'm like a big brother to you now. Do not go anywhere with Mufu. That guy is a snake," Marley said with both hands in his pockets, and the only thing he could do at that moment was just to nod his head in affirmation. "Well, I'm going to get some sleep. Don't you think it's time to rest, or you still want to enjoy the cool breeze?" Marley questioned. "I'll soon join you," he said, and Marley left to where they usually lay down to sleep. Nelson was out there for a few hours, and when he started to feel really dizzy, he stood up and was about to join Marley when he heard these footsteps behind him. Though there were some other guys who were still awake, sitting not too close to where he was, surfing the internet and smoking with headphones on, the footsteps he heard weren't just ordinary ones. The moment he heard them, he started to feel a bit cold, and his mother had once mentioned something like that before. That once you feel something isn't right wherever you are, and then you start to feel cold, it's your instincts trying to send you a message that something isn't right. He looked back swiftly but found nothing, and then he proceeded to go meet Marley. But he continued hearing these strange footsteps behind him. He kept turning and looking at those guys to see if they too were noticing anything. But they were there smoking and with eyes glued to their phones. Then he paused and turned to face whatever it was that was following him. He was so scared, but he had to face his fears. "Who is that?" he quizzed, already panting with his heart pounding so hard. "Nelson," he heard softly before him, but he didn't see the person. "Who is that? Who is calling me?" he questioned, turning and looking around. He was trembling in fear. "Nelson," he heard again softly. "Who is that? Who is calling me?" he asked, turning around, and all of a sudden he saw this image standing before him, but it wasn't clear who it was, because the image was actually standing with a bowed head, and it was that of a young girl putting on a white silky dress. He almost screamed because it was so terrifying, but he decided not to and just wait and see what the image was up to. Suddenly she looked up, and lo and behold, it was Mitchell, his sister. "Jesus," he exclaimed, jerking back. He was still standing there, with the whole of him shivering. "Help me! Save me!" she said slowly, with her eyes dripping with tears, and then she disappeared. "Mitchell! Mitchell!" Nelson screamed at the top of his voice, and immediately some guys came running to him, asking if he was okay. But he couldn't explain anything because he didn't even know where to start from. He was just there in tears, asking himself series of questions in his head like, can Mitchell be dead? And then Mufu and Marley came. "Are you okay?" Mufu queried, but before Nelson could say anything, Marley took his hand and started taking him to that place they usually lay down to sleep. "What happened?" Marley quizzed, and Nelson started to tell him what he saw amidst tears. "Don't worry, we shall visit another native doctor tomorrow before you return home for the burial," Marley said. "But don't you think we should go with Mufu to see his father?" "I think that will be the best option," Nelson said. "Don't mind Mufu, he's a very unserious person," Marley said. Well, they both laid down that night, but Nelson still couldn't sleep. His eyes were both wide open till around past 1, as he kept checking Marley's wristwatch, which was on the floor beside him. "I need to go back home. I must return home," he kept muttering to himself with tears in his eyes. "God, please, keep Mitchell if she's still there. Please help me save my family. Show me how to liberate my family from this," he added. And somehow he slept off. That night he dreamt and saw Mufu giving him a key to a shut door. He took it, and as soon as he did, he woke up and started to hear screams coming from one corner of the bridge. He jerked up immediately and looked beside him, so he could ask Marley what the noise was all about. But he wasn't beside him, and then some of the guys around started approaching, carrying someone from the bush, with some carrying the person's legs and the others carrying the person's hands, and lo and behold, it was Marley's lifeless body. Immediately, Nelson ran to them and started struggling with them to let go of Marley, even though he didn't quite understand what was happening with him at that moment. "Let him go. Leave him alone," he screamed at the top of his voice, but those guys did nothing but to push him aside, and then he sighted Mufu from afar, standing under a tree with a hand under his jaw, and he ran to him. "Uncle Mufu, please tell them to leave Marley alone. I don't know why he's been carried like that," he said, with tears dripping down his face, pointing at them. "Bobo, come," Mufu said, opening his arms wide for a hug. Nelson went to him, and he held him so tight in his arms. Marley has gone to be with the Lord, he whispered in Nelson's ear, and immediately Nelson withdrew himself from his arms because the last time he heard such a sentence was when they lost one of their church members back home. And his dad put it exactly that way when he wanted to break the news to them. How? How do you mean? He queried, staring into Mufu's eyes as tears welled up in his eyes. Marley is gone, Mufu said, with both hands grabbing his head. The only mistake I made was not reconciling with him before his demise. I wish I knew, Mufu lamented, shaking his head. Oh my God, Nelson exclaimed with his head bowed. He was so pained and sad. What could have happened to Marley? He asked himself as tears made their way freely down his face. But Mufu heard what he muttered out of his mouth, and then he sighed. Who knows what happened? I'm even so confused because I saw a little girl last night wearing a black dress with long hair standing right there staring at me, he said, pointing towards where Marley's body was found. And as soon as Nelson heard that, his jaw dropped in awe. You saw the little doll girl, he exclaimed, popping his eyes. What? I don't understand, replied Mufu, staring at him. The little doll girl at my house, Nelson said. You don't mean it. So what's she doing here? Asked Mufu. I don't know. Same way I saw an image of my younger sister Mitchell last night, Nelson said amidst tears. Oh my God, are you sure the doll girl isn't responsible for Marley's death? I seriously don't know, Nelson said amidst tears, and then Mufu sighed. Do you mind following me home to my father? Because I'm thinking of leaving this place and leaving this kind of life, Mufu said. But can I trust you, please? Nelson queried in tears. Oh, Marley has told you all sorts about me, right? But I'm really not the kind of person he perceived me to be, so don't be scared, Mufu said. Please. My father's funeral starts tomorrow, and I'm supposed to be there, but I can't go home just like that. I don't even know if the rest of my family are still alive, Nelson said. Don't worry, after Marley is buried now, we'll be on our way to my place. Though it's been a long time, not seeing any of my family members after all these years. I don't even know if my father will welcome me, said Mufu with his head bowed. He will, Nelson said, and Mufu again gave him a warm hug. Well, Marley was buried after like an hour inside the bush, very close to the bridge. It was Nelson's first time seeing a body being buried. He wept so badly that Mufu had to carry him away from there, and as soon as they left there, they hit the road immediately without any of their belongings, because Mufu said that those his belongings would keep reminding him of the past, as he was now a changed person. After a few hours, they arrived at their gate. The whole place was a beautiful sight to behold. The gate was left open after Mufu knocked on it several times, and a security guard opened it. Yes, any problem? Asked the security guard, staring at Mufu and then at Nelson. We want to see the prophet, said Mufu, but the security guard stood scanning both of them from head to toe. Sorry, wait till Sunday. He is resting and doesn't want to see anyone. He usually shares foodstuffs and money on Sundays, said the security guard. We are not here for food or money, said Mufu. So what are you here for? Prayers? Just go and wait for him in church on Sunday, said the guard, almost shutting the gate without letting them in when a woman came out from the gate. Jesus, Bethel! Daddy, she screamed, seeing Mufu, and then ran back into the house, still screaming, and Mufu stood there grinning. Please step back, yelled the guard, and they both took a few steps backward. Who is the woman? Nelson asked Mufu, who still stood there smiling. I don't want to call her our maid, because she's been with my parents for years now, so she's family, he replied, and then the gate flaunted open, and the prophet Nelson had been seeing on TV walked out majestically. As soon as Mufu saw him, he fell on his knees and crawled to him, and then laid down at his feet, grabbing his both legs. Father, please forgive me, Mufu said in tears. Rise, said the prophet. Bethel, the prophet called, staring into his eyes as soon as he rose, and then gave him a hug, but he paused on seeing Nelson. Who is this? You're too young for the burden you're carrying on your shoulders. And what are you people owing that little girl wearing a black dress standing over there? Asked the prophet, pointing at an empty space. Which girl? Nelson asked, so frightened, looking side to side. She followed you here. I command you to speak in the name of Jesus, said the prophet to the little girl, only he was seeing all of a sudden. And immediately the little doll girl revealed herself and started to twist her neck. Mufu, Nelson, the security guard, and the maid ran behind the prophet. And they all started to peep from there. Nelson was shivering and almost peed in his pants. Where did you come from? What has this boy's family done to you? The prophet asked her, and then she paused and started staring at Nelson, and finally spoke after a few seconds. Who are you to challenge me? She thundered, pointing at the prophet. I am a prophet of the Most High God. replied the prophet, pointing into the sky. "And you dare to challenge me?" thundered the little girl again, staring at the prophet. "Speak now. What exactly is your mission here? I have no business with you, but with Nelson's mother. The mother has questions to answer in our kingdom, and she has refused to do so," said the little doll girl. "Then who are you to his family?" the prophet queried. "I am a messenger, sent from our kingdom. Nelson's father has been taken, the sister is between life and death as we speak, and now it's his turn. When we are done with him, then the elder brother is next, and I shall return to my kingdom when all I have mentioned have been completed." She said, "You lie. His body is the temple of God, and therefore no weapon formed against him shall prosper. His family shall be liberated, and all your evil plans shall return back to the sender," the prophet said, and before they knew what was happening, the little doll girl vanished into thin air. "Where are you from? Do you know your way home?" The prophet questioned hastily and began rushing into his compound, and Mufu and Nelson hurried after him, after Nelson had told him that he knew his way home. "Driver, driver!" the prophet called at the top of his voice, and immediately a young man in his late 30s ran towards him from the backyard. "Are you through with what you are doing?" the prophet asked the young man, and he nodded. "Let's go," the prophet instructed, entering one of his exotic cars, and then signaled Nelson to come in as he initially stood there, staring at him. Mufu too wanted to enter the car after Nelson had entered, but the prophet asked him to stay behind and told the maid that he was going to send them some money on his way, and that they should go get the fattest cow from the market and make merry in celebration of his son that had returned. And on hearing that, the security guard and the maid screamed in excitement. They journeyed for a few hours back to Nelson's house, and when they reached, a neighbor told them that Nelson's mum and his siblings had been taken to his father's village, including his father's corpse. Nelson knew his local government and the name of his village as little as he was, and he had to tell the prophet that he could take him to his village when he asked confusedly how they were going to locate his village. Well, they reached, and as soon as they drove into the compound, Nelson's grandmother started screaming, asking the young guys around to chase them out. But instead of them to do as they were told, they stood there staring at the prophet. And then from nowhere, Nelson's mum surfaced and knelt before the prophet and started to pant real hard, looking like someone who was being chased by hefty men. She actually recognized the prophet. "Please, help my family, sir. I'm sure it was God who directed you here," she managed to say in tears. And then, the prophet walked directly to the grandmother as everyone present couldn't even utter a word. The whole place was as silent as a cemetery. "Mama, what did your son's family do to you?" asked the prophet. "Is it my fault? It's not my fault. Even when my own daughter refused to join us in our kingdom, I killed her and we all ate her," the grandmother said, laughing so hard. "And I spoke to my daughter-in-law gently to come be a part of us so that she will replace me when I'm no more. But she was adamant, and I apologized to her, and then asked her never to tell anyone what I had discussed with her. If she had joined, the people in our kingdom wouldn't have asked me to sacrifice my son. So when she refused, we decided to deal with her by eating all their flesh, and we started with her husband. You see that boy over there?" the grandmother queried the prophet, pointing at Nelson. "He is next," she added. "That boy is God's son, and his family as a whole is now God's family. Therefore, no harm shall befall them," the prophet said and began to pray. He was still praying when the little doll girl appeared, holding Mitchell's hand, giving the prophet and Nelson a devilish look. Mitchell was looking so lean and pale, breathing heavily with her head leaned to one side and her eyes half shut. Everyone there ran out of the compound, screaming at the top of their voices, while Nelson's mom too started to scream, calling on the prophet to help save Mitchell, saying she had been sick for weeks now. The prophet continued praying, and the doll girl let go of Mitchell's hand and transformed into the doll, and somehow it caught fire and started to burn, while the grandmother fell on her knees and started begging them to forgive her. Nelson's mum told her she had forgiven her, and immediately the grandmother fell on her back and gave up the ghost. That was how they buried 2 bodies that same day. Mitchell recovered after a few days, and then they left for the city 3 months after, and Nelson's mom and siblings visited the prophet in his home, where Nelson saw Mufu. Mufu had changed so much. He even prayed with them and advised Nelson's elder brother and him to follow the path of Christ. And today, Mufu, now Bethel, is a pastor in the US. The end. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the story so far, please drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you won't miss any updates. Thank you, and remember, we love you.